Using prescription opioid medication to manage pain from a degenerative spine disease makes me just one of the around 15% of Canadians who use these medicines, derived or inspired by the sap of the opium poppy. This book is about literature, pain, empathy, creativity, depression, and friendship. It's also a biography of two famous opium users, the artist Frida Kahlo and the Romantic era writer Thomas de Quincey. It's a short book, so I've tried to pack in a lot of experiences for you. I wanted to give you the experience of physical pain, I'm afraid, of depression, of love, of friendship, of creation, and of course, of mind-altering drugs. I hope you enjoy. Okay. I'll read for about 15 minutes. As a girl, I loved the Sherlock Holmes stories and read and reread Arthur Conan Doyle's erotically measured lines about the famous 7% solution of cocaine. Sherlock Holmes took his bottle from the corner of the mantelpiece and his hypodermic syringe from its neat Morocco case. With his long, white, nervous fingers, he adjusted the delicate needle and rolled back his left shirt cuff. For some little time, his eyes rested thoughtfully upon the sinewy forearm and wrist, all dotted and scarred with innumerable puncture marks. Finally, he thrust the sharp point home, pressed down the tiny piston, and sank back into the velvet-lined armchair with a long sigh of satisfaction. Like him, I enjoy the waiting. Once I've decided that today is going to be a tramadol day, and I've given myself a deadline before which I absolutely will not cave in and take it, my experience of pain is transformed. Rather than grinding and hopeless, it feels charged, electric. The difficulty I have standing up or sitting down begins to feel noble. The constant, miserable, and exhausting stretching I do to relieve pain and stiffness in my joints acquires a warm-up quality. I am already removed 1 degree from my own experience, and it is a little more observable, a little more interesting. I know that in a little while, after some sore but delicious anticipation, it will melt away in an exquisitely gradual, perceptible way. And then I will feel expansive and happy. The hours ahead are no longer to be endured, but rather to be savored, and this knowledge invigorates me, refocusing my day. Then there's the actual taking of the drug. If you don't get a high from whatever medicine you take, I suppose it is just a medicine. Nobody craves Tylenol or ibuprofen or Lipitor. If, however, the drug you are taking is really, in your own mind, a drug, all the preparation involved is part of a lovely ritual of anticipation. It has a sort of a pleasant glow of association. Do this, feel that. A lifelong non-smoker, a cautious adolescent, and the most sober adult at any party, I have nevertheless been fascinated by intoxication, addiction, and altered mental states for as long as I can remember. I don't think that anyone I know has known that about me. The flame that licks the spoon, the tightening of the rubber strap, and the clinical flicking of a tube with the nails of index finger and thumb. The way you hold the cigarette, even, stretching out your fingers, touching your lips as you inhale. It's all a very private romance. Unfortunately for my sense of occasion and aesthetics, all I do is swallow a medium-sized yellowish pill, chasing it with some water, or more sensibly, given the drowsiness it induces, coffee. The most notorious drug addict in English letters was a man named Thomas de Quincey. He was born in 1785 and died in 1859. De Quincey was perhaps the best essayist in English in an age when creative nonfiction, as it's called today, was having its moment. He chronicled his vivid memories of the pain and pleasures of medicinal opium in his memoir, Confessions of an English Opium Eater. Opium, dread agent of unimaginable pleasure and pain. I had heard of it as I had of manna or of ambrosia, but no further. How unmeaning a sound was it at that time? What solemn chords does it now strike upon my heart? What heart-quaking vibrations of sad and happy memories? Remembrances. Reverting for a moment to these, I feel a mystic importance attached to the minutest circumstances connected with the place and the time and the man, if man he was, that first laid open to me the paradise of opium eaters. By man, if man he was, he means the pharmacist. I too remember when I started taking opioids. As I write this, it's been over 4 years. I expect I felt more self-conscious getting my first dose than De Quincey did, since tramadol requires not only a non-renewable prescription, but the display of valid photo ID to the pharmacist. If you have ever had a toothache like De Quincey, or dental surgery, you understand how quickly one can become desperate for relief. Having some sort of time limit on suffering makes it endurable. It's the same way that running a marathon is tolerable because you know that it will eventually end. Every step gets you closer to relief. I don't think I'm a lightweight. I like to believe that I'm an expert on pain, thanks to hours devoted to close study of it during the births of my 2 children. One at home, one in hospital, neither with painkillers. Those experiences taught me that the most intense pain imaginable can be tolerated for a time, and that the way we experience that pain, empowering, terrifying, humbling, can vary dramatically. And so even childbirth, the most painful thing commonly experienced, doesn't work as an objective measure. There are other sorts of pain, harder to describe. Chronic or recurring pains are insidious. They eat away at energy, optimism, endurance, sense of self. More relevant than a measurement or even a description of pain, then, is the completely subjective impact it has on one's thoughts, behavior, and physical health. Pain above a level 5, moderate pain that dominates your thoughts and to which you cannot adapt, according to one scale designed to measure it, frequently results in temporary personality disorders. At higher levels that continue without relief, personality disorders are almost ubiquitous, and suicide is common. It is pain that now regularly pushes me back to depression. A long-time acquaintance I was happy to forget when pregnancy and breastfeeding turned out to be miracle cures for my apparently hormonal woes. It is as bad as I remembered it. If pain were a substance, it would be a dangerous, mind-altering one indeed. But a quest for pain relief that settles on opioids can bring an escape that is more than just physical, as Thomas de Quincey and I discovered. As the first person to write publicly and in detail in English about the inner experience of taking opium, de Quincey was to become the archetypal drug-dependent, tormented but inspired artist, and the progenitor of a whole new genre of literature, the addiction confessional, later taken up by literary junkies like William Burroughs, Irvine Welsh, Jim Carroll, and many others. At 20, Thomas de Quincey left his desultory studies at Oxford every 3 weeks or so to travel to London, where he would indulge in laudanum, which is opium tincture in water, in alcohol, theater, opera, and long rambling walks through the ancient city streets. The opiate was an essential enhancer, instilling a peaceful curiosity amid the urban tumult. As it happens, I was also in London at about the same time in my life. Just before my 20th birthday, I worked for 6 weeks in a laboratory at St. Mary's Hospital. Also, coincidentally, this is where heroin was first synthesized back in 1874. Like de Quincey, but more sober and more cautious, I wandered through the city. I was in the first throes of what was eventually diagnosed as major depression. I was treated with antidepressants the following year. And yet my state of mind at that point was probably like that of young Thomas, open to everything, romantic, melodramatic, unstable, desperate to take it all in. I like to imagine how it was for him then. The dark buildings and gilding late afternoon light, the vast and noisy variety of people of all appearances and conditions, the cobbled streets that wind like hilly labyrinths up and down and around, the grandeur of intricate stonework everywhere, rotting timbers, memories of plague. Just my height, a bit under 5 feet, and slight, de Quincey was sensitive and precocious with a blazing talent at languages. He was often torn, like me, between a desire to please and conform and an equally strong attraction to rebellion and iconoclasm. I used often, he writes, on Saturday nights, after I had taken opium, to wander forth, without much regarding the direction or the distance, to all the markets and other parts of London to which the poor resort of a Saturday night for laying out their wages. On these long, rambling nights amongst London's working class, de Quincey enjoyed the drugged bliss of both sympathy and separation, writes his biographer, Robert Morrison. In knitting together drugs, intellectualism, unconventionality, and the city, he maps in the countercultural figure of the bohemian. Decades before Edgar Allan Poe and Charles Baudelaire, he emerges as the first plein air, high and anonymous, graceful and detached, strolling through crowded urban sprawls trying to decipher the spectacles, faces, and memories that reside there. De Quincey describes 2 types of laudanum high. Immersion in an interesting crowd, or attendance at the opera, for example, are made just that much more exquisite under the influence of laudanum. But there is a second level of high where, he says, it is good to be alone in order to fully luxuriate in the sensation. Although the opium eater seems to have been the first person to write about deliberately selecting experiences that will be enhanced by opiates, or that will themselves enhance the opiate high, or that somehow together will create an aesthetic and emotional synergy, he's certainly not been the last. And by that I don't just mean avant-garde literati. On online forums, drug users, including prescription users who are genuinely suffering from pain and taking opioids at normal, prescribed doses, repeatedly describe particular music or social settings that seem to enhance the overall experience. I have now mixed morphine and live theater, morphine with intellectual cafe chats, morphine with R. Hydromorphone with intense one-on-one friend conversation and, on a different occasion, with salsa dancing. And tramadol with an El Greco exhibit, a ballet about Vaslav Nijinsky's descent into madness, and watching Brazil beat Panama at soccer. It is also made rolling out coils of clay in a ceramics class, particularly hypnotic. Dorothy was lulled to sleep in her field of poppies in Oz and lucky to wake up. The brilliant red of the opium poppy, Papaver somniferum, has long been linked to death-like sleep or sleep-like death. Fields of poppies covering hundreds of thousands of acres supply the raw material for millions of opioid prescriptions and provide that ambiguous, tenuous exit from the struggles of life. Usually it's a temporary reprieve. Too often, it's permanent. Celebrities die of illegal opioids in droves. The less well-known may also die with needles in their arms or with bottles of prescribed liquid morphine in their medicine cabinets. Since the early 1990s, pharmaceutical companies have engaged in heavy marketing of opioid painkillers, developing and promoting dozens of new varieties. As a result, prescriptions for them have surged. Drugs once restricted to mostly in-hospital, intravenous, short-term, and palliative or post-operative use are now prescribed in lower but often escalating doses over the very long term to patients living with enduring pain. Unsurprisingly, unintentional deaths due to prescription opioid overdoses have also quadrupled in the U.S. over this period. The development has been gradual but accelerated and has flown largely under the popular radar for around 25 years. It's a situation that in some ways mirrors the widespread and haphazard use of opiate-based medicine in the 19th century. Every 2 years or so, we visit my in-laws and large extended family in Mexico City. I usually make a pilgrimage to the sunlit, fantastically colored Casa Azul, the former home of Mexican painter Frida Kahlo, and now a museum dedicated to her art and life. I've been fascinated by Kahlo's life story since my first trip there in 2002. Through her life, Kahlo, who died in 1954, had numerous operations on his spine and pelvis forever damaged by a horrific trolley accident. Her life was filled with hour upon hour of excruciating, demoralizing pain. Through her treatment, she became addicted to painkillers, morphine and meperidine, which is an opiate marketed as Demerol, as well as alcohol, which she also used for pain relief. I tried to drown my sorrows, she wrote, but the damn things learned to swim. So far as I know, Kahlo never heard of De Quincey, but her life reads as one great romantic oscilloscope graph, soaring highs and subterranean lows. She might be considered the patron saint of artsy people who suffer back pain and depression relieved only by reliance on drugs. I never lost my spirit, she wrote of a period spent in the hospital near the end of her life, her beloved husband Diego Rivera ensconced for a time in a hospital room beside hers. I always spent my time painting because they kept me going with Demerol, and this animated me and it made me feel happy. This period, enlivened by the rare presence of unreliable Rivera and by prescription drugs, was one of many fleeting moments that Kahlo snatched from a life otherwise dominated by physical and mental suffering. Seeing a painting in a gallery or in the artist's own home or studio is quite different from looking at it in a book or on a screen. You realize that an actual person, imagining, dreaming, suffering, working, held the brush, made each stroke, set down her brush in weary despair, looked out the window at the sculpture garden, back inside at the anatomy textbooks, the ceramic tiles, the bottle of tequila, or the hypodermic needle. In her diaries, you can see how Kahlo endlessly tried to reason with herself, to find hope when feeling low. She lived large when her health permitted it, collecting illustrious friends and lovers. She also collected votive paintings, folk paintings on tin, in which people depict their real incidents of suffering. In detailed images and captions, they thank the Virgin of Guadalupe for intervening, for letting them recover after they were struck by lightning, incapacitated by polio, robbed and assaulted, or hit by a runaway horse. Or, in Kahlo's case, survived a broken spinal column, collarbone, pelvis, and foot, and had an iron handrail rammed through her vagina, abdomen, and uterus. Upon developing my own spine condition, I graduated from interest to identification with Kahlo. Like me, she took pre-med courses with the goal of becoming a doctor, but ended up, as all doctors will sooner or later, a patient instead. She remained passionately interested in medicine, its tools, and its subject, the struggling human body, and portrayed these in gruesome detail in her paintings. She found solace and meaning in art, while being constantly frustrated by the limits imposed on her by physical and mental suffering. Yeah, just
This way?
thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't
Thanks
want
so
to go in
much.
the camera.
In periods of great illness and pain, Kahlo dressed with extravagant care, layering on jewelry to distract herself and those around her. When feeling particularly demoralized, I copy her, wearing multiple bright necklaces. One of her paintings is a self-portrait with the spine represented as a broken column, resembling something from an ancient Greek temple. For years, I misinterpreted it for some reason to be the long barrel of a gun running up her body instead of a spine. Either way, it is a searing representation of what it feels like to have a crumbling, grumbling vertical axis where a healthy backbone ought to be. Like De Quincey, Frida Kahlo exploited her suffering for its inherently dramatic possibilities in art. I recognize in De Quincey's lush descriptions of the pains and the pleasures of laudanum the impulse I see in myself to romanticize my experiences. In Kahlo, I recognize the desperate nature of that impulse. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the evening, please, and thank you. So